Without further ado, I'm going to introduce a very beloved, our beloved principal, Dan Rott.
It's just Dan. That's good. Well, I'm really kind of overwhelmed with the numbers of people I see here, not just in numbers, but the people I know and haven't seen in many, many moons. And I'm so happy to see you. I've got teachers here who I worked with at Tremont School. If you want to raise your hand, and just the greatest people to work with. And I also worked with Warren Ferrero. He was at Tremont School.
I was at Anderson.
Oh! And then, yeah, I was at Anderson School for 5 years. So. And then I've got a friend of mine who's here, who's I grew up with, one of the best friends I've ever had, and we're still friends after all these years. Second grade, probably, or first grade, we got together, and that's Rick Sequeira, and he's sitting in front. When Rick said that he was going to come today, being Rick, he said he was going to sit in the front row and eat sliced lemons. So, in the book, I think I have described him on one occasion as having a wickedly inappropriate sense of humor. And he really does. So, I want to thank the people in the Dixon Historical Society. It's a great group. I volunteer my time to come in and do some docent work in the museum and help them out when I can. And if you haven't been to the Dixon Museum, you should go over and take a look. There are things there that surprise some folks. And when I've been a docent, have been very impressed with the people who've come in and have given me information and have talked to me about things that they were included in while they were growing up in Dixon. It's really quite an experience. So what we're going to do today, and what I'm going to do, and maybe one other thing, is that I guess I was going to make sure that everybody knew that I grew up in Dixon, went to Dixon schools, went to college, came back, became a teacher. I spent my first 15 years as a teacher in the Travis Unified School District, and then moved over here to Dixon. I was a principal at 5 years in Anderson Elementary, and then about 15 years in Tremont. And while I was in Tremont, we had a very unusual school configuration. We were a year-round school, which was very interesting. And at first, nobody wanted to go to a year-round school. You can just hear people say, I'm not going there. But as time went on and people found out how the school worked, we started to have waiting lists of people that wanted to come in and take advantage of the unique vacation structure and so forth. So that was good. And I had two of the very best secretaries and office managers, three maybe. Kim Pemko was one, Marcia Gallagher, and Sochi Kidua, who's there now. Great people to work with. So I'm going to, first of all, I think, talk to you a little bit about a memoir. What is a memoir? A lot of people don't know. I don't know if I knew, even until I graduated from college. I don't know. A memoir personalizes history. A memoir is a historical account from personal knowledge. It's different than an autobiography, which is factual, a historical account of one's life from beginning to end, and it is oftentimes researched by anyone. So it's different. A memoir is something that is personal, and it's done by the person writing. How did I get involved with writing a memoir? I mean, I graduated from Chico State as a political science major, and then went on to get a teaching credential. I had no training really, But when I graduated or when I retired and I was looking for something to do, I ran across a program at UC Davis Extension called OLLI. It's Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and they run programs, maybe 4 different sessions a year, and they have a variety of different types of classes. It's at modest cost, but you can learn things that have to do with movies, not only about movies, but how they're made. There's travel, medical, health, a number of items. And one of the things that I looked at was called memoir writing. And I did because I was in a program where it was current events. And one of the guys came in and he had this book, and it was about this big. I said, "What's that?" He said, "It's my memoir." "Oh, what do you mean?" He said, "I've got a memoir class, and for 10 years I've been collecting the stories, and I've put it together for my kids." And he said, "I'm giving it to them," and I took a look at it, and I said, "Wow, this is really neat." And it struck a chord with me, because when I was growing up, I wanted to know more about my background, who my family was, a generation or 2 or 3 back. And both sides of my family were recent immigrants. My mom from the Norwegian side, my grandmother had brothers and sisters back in Norway that we stayed in contact with, and then my father's side. But all he knew was what he was told was that they were Germans from Russia. Germans from Russia, what does that mean? Nobody could tell me. I went to picnics in Lodi, large German-American community there, asked people, what do you know about our heritage? Well, somebody told me, "I think we're white Russians." I said, "Okay." So later, because of the internet, we started to learn more and more and more. And now I kind of know the story. And I said, I'm going to write down as much as I can remember, and then add stories of my life here in Dixon. And I'm going to go get into that class, and I did. So this process of writing a memoir took about 5 years, and I went probably 3 to 4 sessions a year, and we wrote and then shared with the people in the class, about 20 in a class. And you learn so much by listening to other people's stories and then practicing yourself. Because again, I had no formal training. So that's what I did, and when I got finished, I was so focused that was what I was going to do. I'm going to write a memoir, and I'm going to put it together and give it to my kids. So that's kind of what I did. The memoir class provides support with content, punctuation, grammar, voice, using a group learning approach, sometimes called a seminar, in a college or a university. No tests, it's very informal, and there are about 25% of the people there are academic types that have retired in Davis, but there are a lot of people who aren't. And it wasn't intimidating whatsoever. My memoir, called What Happened Along the Way, and then it has the Hotel Rott. Well, what does that mean? Well, I guess it's an unintentional metaphor, because I didn't even think of it until 3 or 4 weeks ago. But each room on the long hallway can be said to contain a story. The theme of the book is a partial history of events and stories specific to the Rotts and to where I grew up in Dixon. And I also thought my family might be more interested in reading it themselves if their name was on it. and a little bit of that's true. But what I want to do is to describe location, people, and culture that existed here in Dixon. My goal is to provide firsthand information that is personal and provides a voice for those mentioned and the events described. A family tree with names and dates are important when doing research about our families, but a memoir helps bring the time alive and provides context to the events. On one occasion, I had someone remark that the book had some very sad moments. All I can say is that these events are part of my life. I included a few, but I really like finding and telling stories about happy and funny things while growing up. Some I laughed at the time, others took time to process into a good laugh. Proceeds from this book are donated to the History Museum. Today I'll use sections of the book to illustrate events, but they're not the full content of each chapter. We moved to Dixon in 1953, leaving Lassen County where my dad had a teaching position after serving in the Navy during World War II. He heard that Dixon was growing, that a new elementary school was to be built on the west side of town, where most growth and home building was scheduled for the next few years. So, coming down, we turned off Highway 40, later to be Interstate 80, drove south down what is now Highway 113, moving towards South First. We would have passed the Dixon auction yard, where hundreds of livestock were brought and bought and sold weekly. Buyers from all over California and Nevada came in to buy or sell their livestock. Walmart is now roughly where that was located. Dixon had two meatpacking plants located on First Street. On the north was Mace Meat Company, on the north was Mace Meat Company, later to become Armor Meats, and the other owned by Stoven Brothers on South First, which is today's Superior Meats. The meatpacking plants and the livestock auction business employed many, many men in Dixon. As we drove south past Mace Meat Company, we were impressed by the size of its huge white buildings. Before we reached the railroad tracks, we passed the alfalfa processing facility. That's what I was going to ask you, what the name of that facility was, Ricky, but I forgot to ask you.
It's Fielders.
What? Fielders?
Fielders.
Yeah, okay. Jerry Fielder had that. Before we reached the tracks, we got to that point in time, and the smells that arose at that time were amazing. After a while, people got used to the smell, or they just left. People still talk about the terrible alfalfa smells and the huge airplanes flying over from Travis Air Force Base. People either got used to the noises and the smells of agriculture, or they moved on. The city of Dixon mainly centered between the railroad tracks at First Street and including A Street running east-west through town. The city center looks pretty much like it did then. As small as the center of Dixon was, it anchored a diverse, self-contained, locally owned business community. There were at least 3 car dealerships, 3 grocery stores, including Barker's Food and Party Market, 2 banks, 2 drugstores, a popular pool hall, a comprehensive Farmers Exchange hardware store. There were also insurance businesses, Torsh's Fountain, 3 bars, with Dawson being the most noteworthy, a bakery, 3 gas stations, with Tide Shell located on the corner of what is now the new park. There was even a dress shop called Betty Ann's. Oh, my mom loved Betty Ann's. There were many other businesses that came and went over time. I attended East Dixon Elementary until the new West Dixon Elementary School was built, about 1957. The junior high school classes were located at the same East Dixon site. My dad started teaching upper grades there and later moved over to become the first principal of West Dixon Elementary, which is now the Montessori School, for about 15 years. Any questions before we move on to the doors of the hotel room?
When was West Dixon, the school finished?
About 1957.
Okay.
I'm guessing, I didn't. I don't have to, I don't have to, with what I'm doing, I don't have to be exact. I call somebody like Mr. Schroeder over here, Bill. He knows everything.
Dan, you mentioned the smell of the alfalfa. That was the good smell. You didn't mention the smell from Macy's.
Yeah.
Because when that breeze is hitting, you can smell that.
And the onions from Vacaville.
And
the onions in Backville, yeah.
so we had some issues. But the people that stayed were solid. Chapter 3 is called The Soda Fountain Tree. And what I've done is take segments from that chapter in the book and tweak them a little bit so that they would sound better and make more sense in this form. I'm not going to read you the whole chapter. When I was 7, I walked home from school almost every day. If the weather was really cold or rainy, I caught a ride with a neighbor. No one thought it out of the ordinary for a 2nd or 3rd grade student to walk home, even if it meant crossing the railroad tracks, slicing through town. Sometimes I stopped by the dental office where my mom worked to say hi. Sometimes I asked for money. Hi, Mom, can I stop by Grusendorf's drugstore to get a soda? If she had 10 or 15 cents, she would unfailingly give them to me. She knew that I could buy a variety of drinks for 10 cents. The Grusendorf's fountain ran the length of the north wall and was a perfect place to wait as prescriptions were being processed. People drank coffee or soft drinks or ate pastry while waiting to pick up their prescriptions. "What can I get you today?" said the woman. Looked suspiciously like a nurse wearing a white outfit and starched Nehru hat. The selections were incredible. Lemon, cherry, chocolate Cokes, root beer, flavored 7-Up, and for 20 cents, tasty phosphate drinks. Milkshakes and sundaes were always out of my price range. End of chapter 3. We bought our first home in the newly built tract of homes that included F Street. New neighborhoods were being built in the north and northwest part of town that had previously been farmed and contained nut tree orchards. The neighborhood was the home to many baby boomers about my age. Included on our block were the Elfs, Hulls, Basingers, Duncans, Camerons, Klebergers, Yandels, Baileys, Schroeders, that would have been Muggs and Tim Schroeder, and Machados. From chapter 7, the toxic DDT fog. I wonder sometimes how we survived what we did as kids. I also wonder how my parents and my friends' parents weren't arrested for negligence. Or worse, I believe that the people who lived in California when I was a child were oblivious as a bunch of Texas Wranglers who at the end of a long day can't find a chuck wagon. "Here it comes," yelled Alex Yandel, one of my F Street friends. "Yeah, I see it," said Darrell Kleberger. "What a fog! The street lights are covered and you can't see anything in the flat tops." The flat tops were a housing project on F Street that had been quickly built after World War II to house GIs coming back from the war. They were made of concrete and had flat top roofs. We gathered as a group of about 10 to 12 kids. By today's standards, that's a lot, but I can't remember a house that didn't have at least one child, and could be upwards 2 or 3, but the Hulls had 6 kids. They were needed to deliver milk every morning for the family dairy delivery business. The kids ran up, put milk and dairy items on the front porch. "Time to come home for dinner, Danny," my sister yelled from our front yard. "Hey, tell Mom I'll be in right after we ride with the fog machine," I responded. I stayed as no one else went home, and night and darkness enveloped the streets. The fog drifted closer as a large model pickup truck pulled a 4-wheeled trailer steadily down the street. The trailer pulled a dirty white tank with a sprayer that threw out a huge cloud of mosquito-killing DDT student. We didn't just watch the truck and tank drive past. No, that wouldn't have been any fun. Are you ready? I yelled as I scanned my friends sitting on their bicycles. Follow me. We all took off after the tank trailer and got as close as we could to the spray apparatus as it was spewing out mosquito-killing solution into the air. Larry Bailey and Darrell liked to grab a hold of the side of the tank rig so that they could be pulled up the street, while the rest of us rode through the heavy toxic mist and attempted to avoid crashing into unseen riders, cruising just a few feet away. We knew the possibility of hitting the back of the trailer and getting knocked to the street existed. We thought in terms of skill level rather than the danger we were facing. We were all so carefree. Wash up for dinner, Danny. My mom always reminded me when I got home. Be sure to fold your plate coats so you can use them to finish out the week. I'm busy washing your school clothes. End of chapter 7. From chapter 8, the pickers, nut pickers of Dixon. In those days, we didn't have a lot of disposable income and weren't likely to be given money by our parents, so we hustled small jobs. I mowed lawns, washed windows at downtown businesses. I remember washing windows for Hans Royer of Royer Insurance. My recollection was that Hans was a local icon, as were members of his large family. Another way to make money was to walk into the more rural areas of Dixon and pick walnuts that had fallen to the ground. We made $1 a gunny sack for black walnuts and paid weight for the more valuable English walnuts. We pulled our wagons loaded with gunny sacks to the Farmers Exchange located near the railroad tracks, where they bought our bounty. We made $5 to $10 a week in season. Farmers Exchange was a locally owned hardware store. Mr. Carpenter, we have nuts to sell. Often, Bill Fairfield, the longtime chief of the volunteer fire department, was present. If a fire came into the fire department, a loud horn announced the emergency, and men from businesses all over town left work, sometimes locking their stores until the fire was put out. Being a member of the volunteer fire department was a matter of civic engagement, and the responsibility was taken seriously by all who belonged. End of chapter 8. From chapter 15, the dance card. I was nervous and excited at the same time as I sat with friends on the boys' side of the old multi-purpose room. At my first school dance, a variety of behaviors erupted. Most were immature to downright silly. I sat on a hard chair, afraid to move a muscle. Then I saw Diana Green, an 8th grader, walking from the other side of the room where most of the girls were located. Hi, Danny. I need someone to sign my dance card for the night dance. Would you sign my card? Diana said in a soft voice. Me? The only muscle moving was in my lips. Everyone I knew liked Diana. She was very nice to everyone, including 7th graders like me, at a time when many junior high schoolers are self-centered, critical, and insecure. The pecking order for junior high school students still rivals that of large chicken coops. Socially inept 7th grade boys played games of tag from time to time, completely unaware of the dance expectations and social etiquette. We had to learn about sock hops, snowball dances, ladies' choice songs. This was a sneaky attempt to get more boys to dance, since so many boys, 7th and 8th grade, were reluctant to do so. Not Richard Machado or Bert Caldwell. They were always out dancing. I don't remember the 9th dance being called, but it was a slow dance. I remember staying an arm's length away as we shuffled our feet on the floor. Thank you, Danny. That wasn't so bad, was it? I couldn't talk, so I just shook my head. I thought I might black out. I kind of floated home, as if in a bubble. End of chapter 15. Entering high school age, new challenges and experiences were expected as teenagers learned important social codes and often tried to fit in and belong. "Hey, did you see who was in town?" yelled Richard Kircher when he reached the group assembled in front of the Frosty. Like most of the guys in the parking lot, Richard wore a white t-shirt, blue jeans that were a little short by current standards, and a pair of Converse All-Stars. His hair was curly but combed back with sticky pomade. "I don't know where they're from, but there must be 15 or 20 cars." Nothing created an electric buzz more than hearing of an out-of-town car club cruising the streets of town, especially when there were large numbers. In 1962, the California car club culture had swept the state after exploding to attention in Southern California in the years after World War II. The same was true for motorcycle gangs or clubs. Car clubs existed in most medium-sized towns and cities. A decade or so later, George Lucas made Modesto famous for his large and thriving car club culture when he made the cult classic movie American Graffiti. That's my Norwegian cousin's favorite movie. They all still drive around in like hot rods and stuff. It's amazing. Sometimes, if I had my homework done, I'd sneak out and head to the Frosty, where high school students in the under 20s crowd hung out. There were a few custom cars in the lot. Although hot rods and fast cars were found in Dixon, there weren't many. Danny Anders drove a hot rod I really admired. Alan Wentworth drove his powerful 57 Chevy. I hope it's 57. It's 57 or 50, oh, 55, thank you. He looked forward to going to the Vaca-Dixon drag strip, located halfway between Dixon and Vacaville, to race other cars in a controlled environment provided by the facility. Alan's car was competitive and he was often seen tinkering with the engine in front of his house with the help of his dad, Louis. This type of male bonding was common as father and son worked together on car motors. Going to the drags was a popular designation for many young people during this time. The cruising club was loaded with custom painted street rods of bright candy apple red or other metallic colors. Some cars had specialized painted flames on the front hoods. One of the guys in the parking lot standing next to the street saw that one car had a stamped metal plaque in the back window that read, "Lodi Crushers." On one pass on A Street, a 56 Chevy slowed down and four rather large guys stared in our direction. They wore matching white jackets with the collars pulled up. Two of the guys wore their hair in flat tops with fins, with the top short but pushed up with pomade and the sides longer and combed back. The other two riders wore the more traditional flat top with no fins. They took off after a second run through town, and we never saw them again. At the back of their mind, young people knew about the sensationalized stories of motorcycle gangs taking over towns like Hollister, California in 1947. The Frosty crowd wasn't going to let this happen in their town. End of chapter. Chapter 21, the end of season. I heard voices but couldn't track their meaning. I looked straight up into the night and barely made out the faint stars through the strong artificial light, pushing back the darkness. Then I heard someone yell, "Are you all right?" I was momentarily confused, and then I saw a man's face leaning down into mine. He was wearing a black ball cap and a long-sleeved shirt that was striped black and white. An excruciating pain was gradually taking over all of my sensory functions. I looked down to where the pain was exploding and invading my consciousness. My wrist made my arm look like the neck of a swan. It bent down and then curved up awkwardly. I felt like I was alone, surrounded by blackness. I heard distant voices and noises, but I couldn't process much. Then there was Coach yelling, asking me, "Danny, can you hear me? Are you okay?" His hand clasped around my shoulder pads, and he looked concerned, but not alarmed. High school football games were played at the Dixon May Fairgrounds. And I was laying on the field directly in front of the bleachers. I was helped up and taken to the Woodland Clinic, the only regional hospital in our area, to have my wrist set in a long cast placed on my arm. In those days, the town's only doctor, Dr. Price, attended all home football games to administer to injuries and any emergencies. Dr. Price had been my doctor for as long as I could remember. Occasionally, he visited our home when my sister or I were sick. My parents were always concerned when it came down to a flu or respiratory illness. Dr. Price was thin, wore glasses, always looked a few hours short of a good sleep. His clothes were routinely rumpled and his shoes scuffed. His voice was quiet and always calming. I don't think I ever saw him without his fat black leather bag. Most community doctors at that time carried one. Like many towns Dixon's size, school events made up a large part of the community's attention. In my day, a few excellent athletes moved on to the higher levels of participation. In the 50s, Farrell Funston, the class of 1955, went on to play at the University of Pacific, and then on to play in the NFL for the Cleveland Browns for a couple of seasons. In the 1960s, Ted Seifert played offensive line for the University of California, and then he played center with the USFL's California Sun until the professional leagues were consolidated into the NFC and AFC to form the NFL. Great local teams also came together in the 50s and 60s. The 1964 football team went 10-0, while in 1966 the boys basketball team went 24-0. End of chapter 21. Chapter 14, the last horseback ride. Keith Cameron promised us a short ride. Starting at the feedlot that was part of Mace Meat Company's slaughterhouse at the north edge of town, we hopped on his dad's quarter horse, a breed used by many cowboys and ranchers in the cattle industry. His dad, Duncan, was a livestock buyer for Mace Meat. The horse was brown, a color common for working horses used by many ranchers. Nothing flashy like movie horses or those seen in parades, like the annual Dixon May Fair Parade. I'm not sure why I didn't use a saddle. I suspect we didn't want to spend time with a blanket placing the saddle. Keith put on a bit in the horse's mouth, pulled the bridle over its head. Keith was riding in front. Of course, I was on the back. We were on our way. Let's go. Yeah. Ride 'em. As an early teen, it wasn't hard for me to become excited about riding bareback. We rode carefully across Highway 113 to avoid oncoming traffic. West of 113 was a barren, unincorporated area that would soon be built out with several subdivisions as growth swallowed up land in west and north toward the freeway. We had ridden bareback before, however, this time we would soon be on a runaway horse galloping out of control, straight for Highway 113. Thank you for being such a good audience. You know, as I was preparing for the program here, I started thinking of the 50s when I was growing up here in Dixon in the 50s and 60s. And there are just so many characters, so many people that were members of the community that everybody knew. And one of them, I'll just mention them because I've never forgotten them, Joe the plumber. Joe rode around town in a Model T flatbed truck, and it popped and you could hear him driving, and there was no hood, no top to it, and he'd drive around from job to job. Everybody knew Joe the plumber. There was Senorita Vinez, Rose Vinez. She could be seen after school hours walking her dog around, but she was a character. She told the most amazing stories in Spanish class. There was Harold Axelson. I have to give a shout out to Harold Axelson because Without him, I don't think I would have gone to college. I really don't. I mean, I was just a kind of a mediocre student floating around. And when I got into his classroom, he started to talk about history, especially World War II. He was a glider pilot at the time of the war. And he would talk to us about some of the things that he saw and some of the things that he experienced. And he would carve out a little time for current events into his day. And, you know, it just kind of woke me up that these kind of things are going on. And I loved it. And after that, I started to go to the library and check out historical fiction. And I started reading one book after another and became a voracious reader. But up till that point in time, I was average at that. So he was, I thought, a real, somebody that a lot of people remember. Of course, there was Red Finney, everybody knew, Chuck Airy, and I not only had Harold Axelson in 7th grade, I had C.A. Jacobs in 8th grade.
Yep.
And C.A. Jacobs would talk a little bit about World War I. So I know I don't look that old, but I had teachers that experienced both of those wars. And you know, there were traumatic events for their generation, and they would talk about it. Never forgot it. It made an impact on me. So maybe in the future, you know, people will be talking in meetings like this about John Pardee and Danny Lozano, who is a sports agent, a very big time guy who has a lot of big clients and things. But those people may be mentioned in a similar form. But I guess I'll conclude there. And again, I appreciate you being such a good audience and listening. Any questions that you have still about any of these things?
I just want to tell you that your dad was one of my most memorable teachers, one of my absolute favorites. I had him for 6th grade in the old grammar school.
I've seen photos, but I didn't really pay attention to whether it was 6th or 7th grade. But
6th.
And yeah, thank you. I mean, I really admired him in a lot of ways. He taught me a lot of things, you know, growing up. He didn't know how to work on engines or motors or anything like that, but he was a good guy. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Do they still have classes like at UCD about making a memoir?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Every they do. I brought a magazine or a catalog. This is one for the last, maybe the last session. But when you go through here, there are really interesting programs that they've put together for the people that live in the area. Many university towns have OLLI programs because the academics are kind of used to, you know, using that rather than going fishing or doing something else. But if you're in the area and you're interested, I talked to Tim Yernshaw and talked to him about what I was doing, and he went to the class and he did a really great job of writing a memoir as well. And as far as I know, he's had a little bit of an accident, but he has been a member for 3 or 4 years. I think I was a member of OLLI for about 10. And so I'll leave that here if you want to come up and take a look at it. I probably mentioned 7 chapters in the book here, but there's 64 chapters. And again, some of them are things that I did with my kids when they were growing up and where we went on vacation. I have a son that lives in Oregon, so I mentioned some things there where people growing up in town worked when we were working to go to college. most of the young men worked out at the freeway stations where we had 3 or 4 or 5 people would come up to a car. One would fill it up, another would wash the windows. I don't know how many people remember that. That's what we did. And in the same time, then we would try to say, you know, those tires are getting a little bit thin. You sure you don't want to stop in here? We can get guys on that right now. But we made good money. We made about $3.65 an hour and did pretty well. Thinking in terms of college costing the time I was going to school, $99 a semester. So I kind of turned a little bit of a blind eye to people that complain about kids not working to go put themselves through school. I did. I'd go back up to Chico with about $3,500 that I'd made in the summer, with tuition being $99 a semester, and find a room with 4 other people. It was doable. I could work and put myself through college. And you know, I did. I feel for some of the kids today, because I don't know if those kind of experiences are available. Any other questions? Yes.
How do we get a copy of the book?
Well, we were going to bring some here, but I suggested to Kim, we've got them available at the History Museum.
And where? I live out in the country.
Oh, it's over on A Street. We're just
Tell
down
them why
from
it
Bud's.
is.
Okay.
And it's open on Friday and Saturday, and you know, for 2 or 3 hours. I thought to myself, if I brought some and left them here, people would maybe pick them up and not ever have an opportunity to have a reason to go to the History Museum. And a lot of times people will come in there and go, gosh, I didn't know you had this.
I need 2 of them. I'll make a
Yeah,
point.
we've got some. In fact, I just ordered some from Amazon and have them in my car. But they have probably 5, 6, 7 or so in stock now.
Dan, you mentioned C.A. Jacobs, who I agree was very much a vestige of World War I. I remember memorizing Flanders Field and Pummel. But something that would never happen nowadays, and I don't know if he did it with you, because you were 2 years younger than me, but we had to memorize the United States Constitution. I mean, Article 1, 2, 3. We knew it all. We knew what the Constitution was. And also he had us go on stage, what's now Anderson, it was East Dixon Elementary then, and say the Gettysburg Address as well. Do you remember those things?
Vaguely.
Yeah.
We had to get up and recite "If" by his Kipling with Mr. Jacobs. Remember that?
To do what?
Jacobs had us memorize "If," that poem, that long-ass poem. And then we would go to the stage. That's what we had to do.
And we also had to act out in costume the poem Snowbound.
Snowbound, yes. We went to his house, and I was dressed, then I was dressed as an old man. Now I am an old man. Dressed that way. And we had you know, you drank from a jug like they would have done back in whatever time that was. I don't remember what it was. But it was actually at his house, which is something you can never do now. The whole class come to his house. Never do that
We
now.
weren't a very big class, at least mine wasn't a very big class.
27 kids maybe?
Yeah.
I think we had 90 that graduated that year from
We had
elementary.
64.
Yeah, we had less than 60.
I remember that part of my dad's curriculum that I did see had a lot of poems that the students memorized and were expected to present to the rest of the class. But I don't know what those were, but they were very popular and very, they were maybe even patriotic, some of them, and some of them were things that were anchored on being an American or being, a good person, that kind of thing.
At the time, it was just memorizing some
Yeah.
things that made, but later on, oh, the Constitution. I mean, I know what, unlike a lot of people in this world, really, I knew what it was.
Well, any others? Again,
Yeah, I have one. You're talking about the teachers and everything, and I had one of my classmates relay a story to me on last Tuesday about when he came to Dixon. He came from Knight's Landing, and he came in the 7th grade, and that would have been 56, maybe even 55. But anyway, he was a stranger. He's a big boy. He was a stranger in town. And the 8th graders told a cousin of mine, Peter Tim, to go whip his ass. So Peter, being Peter, went outside at the right recess or after school, I don't know. But they went outside to the backyard, to the north side on the asphalt out there. And they're just about ready to start fighting. And who should come out and break them up before they could throw the first punch? Harold Axelson. So Harold Axelson created a lifelong friendship between Peter Tim and Del Delgard. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, your mom was an institution too, because she was a working woman for Dr. Knight. And I remember when I was in junior high, when St. Dick was first opened up, that I guess if somebody missed an appointment, your mom would she knew the neighborhood, so she would just call like one of the moms who was home to tell them, your kid who's over at St. Jacobs, have them walk across the street to the, dentist's office, because she knew everyone, but she was quite an institution too, I think, for Dixon.
Well, I remember it through high school. We used to go out to Rearman's out in the Delta, and they'd find an island out in the Delta somewhere, and he would take us out there to Robo. This is George, the older brother. We're all younger, we're underage, and he'd leave us a keg of beer. And we'd just party all night.
George, he'll still do that for you.
I don't know anything about it.
George Rehrman.
I was your next door neighbor for a while. I want to know why Lassie didn't get at least a mention in your book. I'd read it.
Oh, that was mainly my sister's dog.
You like Lassie.
Well, and my sister had other dogs after that one. It was Lassie 1, Lassie 2, Lassie 3.
Lassie was.
We weren't very creative.
Yeah.
I had all those teachers you had and everything, and you talked about adults that maybe influence our life, and I'd like to mention Joe Ferreira.
Oh, thank you.
His dad, he was an Italian-American immigrant.
Best driver for you.
And
Yeah, he talked about it.
he ran the projectors down at the Dixon Movie House and drove the school bus. I grumbled about it, but I rode the school bus. We were the first kids on and the last kids off. I probably spent more time with Joe Ferrell than his family did. So anyway,
Thank you.
Joe was a big positive influence to me.
Well, thank you. He ran movie projectors from the silent movies until about 1970s. He taught me to do it when I was like 12 years old.
Speaking of movie projectors and movies, there's a section in the museum dedicated to a dog. What's that dog's name? King. Dedicated to King and his owner. Charlie Knoll. Oh, right. And that is a fabulous story if you haven't heard about Charlie Knoll and his dog, and how the movie producers and the people who had money wanted that dog so badly. And the things that Charlie was doing to kind of tweak them a little bit and kind of get advantage over those guys. It was really a fun thing. But when you go in, it's right to the left, and you can read a little bit, and they've got a marquee sign that was oftentimes used before electronics to announce that movies would be in the area. I'm running out of steam. Yes.
Glass blowers on the
Yeah.
Do you guys remember that?
Right where Bud has expanded into it now, but right there.
Yeah, just one little guy that made all these little things. Do you remember that?
Price Corner.
Yeah.
Glass one. I remember Corner Cafe.
But watching the glass blower through the window.
And Strawman's department store.
Yeah, I remember that. But it's funny because I asked
That's not there, is it?
Well, it's kind of Robin's.
Oh, it's Robin's now. Oh, yeah.
There's a purity one.
There were many more businesses that, again, came and went that I didn't mention, but just having you sit, a lot of people who were here that were living then, you can kind of remember what those places were, and it kind of brings back memories, I think. Anyway, so there's 60, that I mentioned, 64 different chapters, and about half of those, I think, or more, about 34, 35 of them, have some reference to Dixon. So.
Twinkie Town.
Am I?
Excellent. The Hotel Rott
Oh,
to them, and I mean, I know because I read the book, but
the, could you see that?
Yeah, right here.
She's mentioning very good friend of my mom's, my wife's. This photo was taken by my wife in the Czech Republic of Prague, their capital. And my son found the place 3 or 4 years earlier, told me, if you're in Prague, look up the Hotel Rott, you can't believe it. So we did, and my wife Joan took a photo of this and me standing there. And while we were doing the book, we kind of blew up a little bit of the size, and she's standing in the back. She passed away about 6 years ago. She's standing, you can see her standing there. I mean, it's just kind of I had no idea. I'd forgotten that she had taken it and that she was included. Anyway, well, thank you all. Yeah.
Well, thank you so very much. I can vouch that the book is excellent, and so if you haven't read Dan's book, I encourage you to pick up a copy. Come visit us at the museum. We're open Fridays and Saturdays from 11 to 2. And if there are no further questions, we have a little bit of a description about the refreshments today. So.
Hey students, thank you for being here for the principal. 3 fingers, that means silence. Your mothers have graciously brought the ingredients for your school lunches today, but they didn't have time to pack the lunches. Something about running off to a meeting with the Dixon Historical Society. So they've asked me to pass on to you the instructions to line up in orderly manner, to pack your lunch. Your mothers have left 2 types of sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly, and bologna. So just choose which one you want, pack it, and go back to your table. Any disruptive or disorderly conduct will turn into detention.